listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Frederick. With me today is Dan Corsaro, who is the founder and CEO of Bundled. Dan, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I'm stoked to be here.
Well, yeah, I'm excited to chat. You and I have chatted a few times and had some good conversations, and I think there's a lot of stuff we can talk about today. But I know one theme that we want to dive into is of course entitlements and what that means and how they work and what are the challenges in the space. But before we get into any of that, for our listeners who don't know, tell us about yourself and how you found yourself in the world of subscriptions.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working with subscriptions for the better part of a decade now. Three separate companies, but I've partnered with tremendous amount of subscription companies over that time frame to drive growth. Every company I've worked at has catered to kind of niche, passionate audiences. The first company was Crunchyroll, which served anime fans. Um, I saw Crunchyroll go from 250,000 subscribers to 2.5 million in my time there, and it's well over 5 million now. Was acquired by AT&T shortly after I left, and has since been sold to Sony. Then I pursued a personal passion, went and worked on a subscription for surfers at Surfline, and I managed growth there, and that was awesome. I worked with a bunch of people that loved the same thing that I loved, and um, got to go surfing at lunch, and I got to expand my purview a bit more into the product side of growth as well, which was a great experience for me. I worked very closely with the engineering team that managed our subscriptions and entitlements, and built that system and built our payment system on top of Stripe. So that was a whole new kind of lens through which to understand the subscription business model, right? The actual technical mechanics that go into it. Great experience there. And then most recently, I went over to bodybuilding.com to drive growth for their fitness subscription business called BodyFit. And I was there for about a year as a member of the executive team. And across all of these instances, I kind of noticed repeat themes. It was kind of like a cut and paste, right? At every company I went to, you use a lot of similar strategies to drive growth, regardless of the audience. Of course, it takes a really solid understanding of your user base and what drives their behavior and what they find valuable. But applying the kind of same strategies to each core community worked to drive growth. And so I kind of arrived at a place where I said I could keep doing this on a one-off basis, or I could look to build a solution that drives growth for these companies, and kind of seamlessly apply some of the strategies that I've used in the past, which brought me to founding Bundled. So, and to conversations with you.
Right. Well, tell us about Bundled.
Yeah.
That was a great lead in into what
Yeah.
got you to founding Bundle, but tell us about what that
Yeah.
fundamental problem was around growth that you were trying to solve.
Yeah. So, for any subscription company, but definitely for companies that are catering to niche, passionate audiences, um, as the subscription business grows, uh, the hill that you have to climb up in order to drive growth becomes steeper. Um, I'm sure you've had several conversations with guests in the past about churn, and if you're churning 1% of your audience, as that audience gets larger and larger, the total number of people that you're churning just gets higher and higher. And so you need to add more and more people. As you expand outside of your core audience, for again a niche company, the acquisition of those incremental people becomes more difficult and more expensive. So a lot of these companies kind of, have churn as a headwind, and they don't have as much tailwind in terms of catering to their core as they're growing. They're kind of catering to a more peripheral audience, and they hit kind of terminal velocity, right? And so they inevitably start to explore, like, what can we do? How can we continue to grow? Because as you know, with subscription, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? So, one of the things that they start to do is explore, well, is our pricing correct? Do we have the right price point to drive growth? And solving pricing is a very difficult problem to solve. Knowing what the right price point is to maximize growth for your audience, that's a very difficult problem. It's not something that you can easily just kind of test into, right? So the other side of the equation is value. Can I increase the value that I am providing to my audience? And, that comes in a diversified kind of set of solutions. You can try to create more value on your own. You can invest in new products and experiences. If you're Netflix, you up your content budget to $10 billion, right? But if you're a smaller company, some of those options aren't necessarily available to you. Product development takes a long time, and it's uncertain, and it's expensive if you're developing a whole new kind of suite of products for your core audience. So one avenue that companies start to explore is partnership, right? Can I add more value through partnering with a third party that has a product experience that caters to my audience, right? And partnership, over the course of my experience, has driven a tremendous amount of growth for the companies that I worked at. But it's not easy. It's not easy to execute. It's not easy to implement. And that kind of brought us to what our initial concept of was for Bundled, to kind of enable seamless partnership across these subscription businesses. Specifically, our goal was to create a marketplace for subscription businesses, where end users could come in, bundle multiple services together, have a single sign-on to access those services, pay for all of those services in one place on one bill, and receive a discount for, based on the number of services they subscribe to. So that was concept one. And actually, the topic that I think we want to talk about today, entitlement, and conversations about entitlement and payment with potential partners, kind of landed us where we're at right now with Bundled, which is a fairly different concept than where we started.
Right. So entitlements is one word. It's been called grants. It's been, whatever you have access to as a customer, right? So maybe let's
That's right.
start there. How do you define it?
Yeah. I think so. Access is the key word for me when I think about entitlements, and I think a great analogy for entitlements, or kind of a conceptualization of entitlements, is like a key and lock system, right? And what keys do you have to the doors at Netflix or Spotify or Hulu or Amazon Prime, name your subscription company? What keys do you have, and what access are you granted as a result of those keys? And on that point, I think it's very important to align. It's a word, entitlements and grants, like you said, that kind of gets thrown around. If you're a software engineer working at a subscription company, it's a word you're very familiar with, right? Especially if you're handling subscription systems. Um, if you're a growth marketer at a subscription company, it's actually not something that you're always thinking about, right? And yeah, and you know that that kind of let's call it friction between those two parties um, can create challenges because a growth marketer might just say, "Hey, throw another plan on top of here. Let's just create a lower price tier, right?" And that's got to be easy, right? That's got to be super simple to do. And if you talk to the software engineer about what the associated entitlement with that plan is and how that entitlement feeds through all of the applications and all of the end user experiences and the entire payment system, it's very complicated, right? Um, so I think it's very important to understand the nuances. And quick shout out to the handful of engineers that I worked with at Surfline that educated this growth marketer on the complexities of entitlement and how challenging it can be.
Yeah, and for the most part, and this will go into, kind of take us into the rest of our conversation. But if you're talking within an organization, you're talking about getting over the paywall and then getting access to whatever benefits are associated with what you just paid for, right? And part
That's
of the
right.
challenge comes into, especially when you're talking about different plans or different bundles within your organization of I like good, better, best, or bronze, silver, gold, the different
Right.
benefits that you put within them, whatever system's being access to provision those benefits needs to know, oh, give Dan these benefits. And then, oh, when Nick comes in, he gets those plus these other ones. So you start layering that
That
stuff together and it becomes this huge grid of, oh, okay, if this, then that, but if this, not that, that becomes very challenging for engineers for sure, right? So it's hard to explain the complexity here, but that's the reality of what ends up happening, right?
100%. And there's there's a lot of dimensions to it too. It's um, as someone is moving through an application, it's give access to this aspect of the application, but not this aspect. Um, you know, if you're a bronze tier, you're still hitting paywalls at other points in the application if there's a gold or platinum tier, right? And it's across multiple applications. If you have mobile apps, if you have living room apps, and you're a streaming company, right? Like it's very very complicated. And the other thing is, and we'll get more into this, but it's also there's a time dimension as well, right? How long are you granting this access for? Are you granting access for this session? Are you granting access via a cookie for a 30-day window? Like, how long are you granting access to this username and password for, right? Um, and I I think we'll hopefully have time to touch on this too, but that username and password, are there limitations to how many logins it can have and how many devices it can be logged in, different devices it can be logged into, right? And so there are just multiple dimensions that are layered on top of each other. And yeah, I mean, I don't envy the engineering team that handles entitlement for, say, a company like Netflix. Like, it's got to be very, very challenging job.
Right. So we've established that even within any given organization, from identity management to billing to payments, subscriber life cycle, the entitlement, the fulfillment systems or content delivery systems, these things all have to talk to each other just to know just to be able to deliver on the promise that you made to the consumer when they gave you their credit card or whatever in the very first place. I mean, this is just the base
That's
level
right.
of what any single organization has to deal with and the complexities there. So I know
That's
one of the
right.
problems you're trying to solve for when you're talking about partnerships and bringing multiple organizations together is, okay, now I've bought a bundle, so to speak, or maybe I'm
Right.
wanting to share some benefits for some reason, bundle or not. So how are you guys solving for making this easier for partners to work together?
Yeah, definitely. There's one thing that you touched on there. One part of the statement that you made that I think is really important to understand. You mentioned when someone gives you their credit card or their payment, for the vast majority of companies, they're actually not giving the company their credit card or payment information, right? It's being processed through Apple. It's being processed through Google. It's being processed through Stripe. Um, and therein lies, part of the entitlement complexity is each one of those payment processors has a database that says this person paid me. I have successfully processed payment, and that database has to stay in sync with your entitlement database. And going back to the key and lock analogy, it's almost as if each one of those databases or payment processors is kind of selling a different type of key. Not any one of them is selling, there's the same entitlement, but the way that they communicate the entitlement to you. Apple has receipts. Stripe has webhooks. The way they're communicating this entitlement and the fact that payment has been successful or it hasn't, or you're in a retry cycle, right? Nightmare number two. You're in a retry cycle. Like that's all different across these different payment providers. So at the end of the day, one of the challenges is kind of keeping all of these things in sync, right? Keeping all of these different databases in sync. And our original conception with the subscription marketplace was, we wanted to enable this bundling and abstract a lot of this away for subscription companies. And a recurring piece of feedback that we got over and over again was, look, I'm already handling payment and entitlement across all of these different systems. I'm going to have to add another one, and you're going to have your own rules. And I can already tell they're probably going to be fairly complicated, because if someone wants to change their subscription bundle, or if someone wants to, right, that's going to be complicated. So here's just yet another layer that I have to add in. Now, we explored ways of getting around that, but to go back to the concept of databases, right, and databases staying in sync, we kind of looked at that, and we looked at the feedback that we had received from potential partners, and we said, what's happening in the world of databases right now, and is there a way to provide a better experience around things kind of staying in sync, and around kind of universal entitlement, let's call it. And so we started exploring blockchain, and what blockchain might be able to do with respect to databases staying in sync. Ultimately, blockchain, I think a good way of conceptualizing it is a public database, a publicly accessible database. And that's the way that we're looking at it. And I'll pause there, because I threw out a word, blockchain, which is like heavily loaded, I think, right now in the world today. And so I think there's a lot that goes into the word blockchain and the use of blockchain technology. And just as a point of clarity for us in the way we think about it, I would like to completely separate cryptocurrency and the speculative crypto markets and uh, Dogecoin and all of those things. I would like to separate that completely away from the conversation and just look at blockchain as a technology and as a public database and ask yourself, what can you do with that technology? What can you do with the fact that you have a public database? And to bring it full circle, I touched on the complexity that you reach when you have multiple payment providers and Stripe, kind of communicating via webhooks and Apple communicating via, um, uh, receipts, and Google has their own methodology. And um, so, let's 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 just like do a thought experiment for a second, if you will, and imagine if all of those companies were just selling the same key, right? They were just selling the same key, and they were communicating uh, entitlement. They were communicating payment in the same way, right? And the only thing that an end subscription company had to worry about was whether or not someone had the key, right? Someone owned the key. Um, and that line of thinking kind of brought us to where we're at now and brought us to thinking about quote unquote entitlements and blockchain in the way that we're thinking about it. So I spit out a ton there, Nick. I'm sure there's a lot of
Yeah,
rabbit holes
no,
to go
no, that was
down, but
all fantastic groundwork. I mean, you're right. Anytime you hear the word crypto blockchain, for the millions of people who don't understand it, the majority of the population,
yeah,
for very good reason, because it's very convoluted. You have to separate out this, I like speculative market or speculative value that there is around both cryptocurrencies as well as NFTs, because those
yep,
really are just
yep,
digital things that have value because people say they do. So let's
that's
just
right,
now set that aside and
100%.
say that's what those are. But the
Yep,
foundation that those things are built on, and that you see a lot of companies, Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase, and big banks and organizations putting a lot of time and money into, is this concept of blockchain, which is, I love the word public database because that's exactly what it is, right? It's
right,
a, they call it ledger a lot, but it's a database, but it's
yeah,
it's publicly verified. So there's so many
that's right,
distributed copies of it that so many people can weigh in and go, yes, when someone is presenting a transaction, all of these people can sign off and go, yep, it's authentic because so many people say it is, which is
that's right,
even better than any single, database or intermediary being in the middle of every transaction, including the Fed for that matter. So
that's right,
that model has a lot of power to it, and that's why these organizations are investing so much in it. So the infrastructure that you're thinking here makes a hell of a lot of sense for this concept of entitlements or access to whatever the benefit might be. But I think
that's right.
maybe let's talk a little bit about how can organizations align around that concept. Do we need to come up with this universal structure of a an entitlement or a grant or whatever we want to call it here? What needs to be established in order for this to be effective?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. And to be honest, I don't have the perfect answer to that, right? I don't know if there's a specific protocol or type of blockchain that needs to be developed in order to enable this to happen perfectly. I just have what our concept is, and we, you know, to go back to kind of our train of thought and our line of thinking that brought us to where we're at, we said, well, okay, great. If if you were to if you were to effectively tokenize entitlement, right? If you were to tokenize um, access, because at the end of the day, a subscription is just access to it's recurring access to a product over time, right? And so if you were to tokenize access and um, kind of provide entitlement to these experiences that subscription companies are selling via tokens, what would that look like, right? And and so that's kind of where we started, and then we went a little bit further down the rabbit hole and said, well, um, you know, you can tokenize access to a lot of experiences within these companies that maybe you don't have to sell tokens per se, but um, you can enable tokens to symbolize achievements or preferences or activity within an application. And those things, those symbols, can actually be very valuable outside the context of that particular application and across the user experience. So call it the user experience for the web in general, right? And we said, okay, well, that's really interesting, particularly because it doesn't require a company saying, I'm going to shift my business, I'm going to shift the way that I make money for my business from something that I know works, which is subscription via Apple and Google and Stripe, right? Into this maybe a little bit less known technology. And I don't know all of the implications or understand all of the implications. We felt like that was a bridge that was very far to cross for a company, right? This is the primary way that you make money. Okay, but is it a bridge too far to cross to say, hey, I'll just throw out an example, Strava, right? Strava is a company that provides a service for athletes that are like runners or bikers or swimmers. It's a fitness tracking application, right? And Strava has achievements within the application. We're all familiar. You ran, you ran 3 miles today. You swam 2 miles yesterday. You ran three miles every day for the last month, right? There are achievements within the application. Is it a bridge too far for Strava to say, well, I'm just going to tokenize those achievements and I'm going to make those symbols available and universally recognizable outside of my application. And I'm going to enable other applications and services that cater to my community to entitle those tokens to benefits and experiences that are good for my community as a result. To carry the case study or the thought experiment forward a little bit, let's say Nike is creating an awesome new running shoe, right? And they want to beta test it. And they want to beta test it with people that have a proven ability and a proven dedication to running, marathon level runs on a week-to-week basis. Where are they going to go? How are they going to find those people? Well, if Strava is tokenizing their achievements, boom, like there's your population, and Nike can entitle those people accordingly. Now, that's one little example. There's a whole kind of spectrum of things that you can do here, but hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that example kind of makes it tangible for yourself and the audience to understand how we're thinking about tokenization.
It's funny, Dan, because you and I have talked on this topic a few times offline, and every time we've had a conversation, I feel my brain wanting to explode with all of the different ways this could be applied.
Right.
It's so interesting. And as you were talking here, one that came to mind, and I think we've seen it in just about every market, is you go to I'll just use Nashville Predators as my favorite example. But the somebody scores a hat trick in the game, and you get a free frosty at Wendy's, right? Well, right now the way
Exactly.
to redeem that is you show your ticket, right? But if what if Preds could say that to our most loyal fans, season ticket holders, and ones that have bought merch or whatever? Hey, if this happens, we will tokenize your send you a token, whatever, for
Right.
onto your account that you can then take to Wendy's and you can show them, and or maybe we'll have an integrate. They can pull down that token and see that
Yeah.
because I'm a Wendy's member, also that you get this free frosty, and it can
Right.
it can be redeemed. But the applications here are just massive.
100%. And we feel the same way. That's that's our belief as well. And we're really working to make it as easy as possible for companies to take advantage of blockchain, to take advantage of tokenization in this way. Um, we know that blockchain is this kind of fuzzy issue, or this fuzzy topic out here for a lot of companies. We know that cryptocurrency is this kind of fuzzy topic. At the same time, you have companies like large companies like Disney and you know sports sports leagues, the NBA, NHL, taking advantage of blockchain. Right now, the way that they're doing it, I don't necessarily find a tremendous amount of value in. A whole nother podcast maybe there, Nick. But
Probably, yeah.
uh, yeah, but I think it kind of um, has piqued interest, right? And for some of the companies that I've worked at, I know that there are people within those doors going, wait, like, should we have our own NFT marketplace? My answer to that is no. My answer is how can you use blockchain to unlock value that you currently have, right? Not try to go create new value somewhere else in a separate experience, in a separate kind of marketplace, but how can you use blockchain to tokenize experiences, to tokenize, again, preferences and achievements, and the activity that happens within your community to power that community, and kind of enable a much deeper connection than you otherwise could.
So, there's certainly the angle of these tokens can be viewed as increasing subscriber or member value in some way by giving them
Right.
access to something else and maybe even giving it away in that process. But what
Right.
are some ways you think this could also be monetized?
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, so let's. I think there are a few ways. The first is, um, these tokens provide entitlement. So going back to, let's do another example. I think the best way that I've found of kind of explaining the concept is through a tangible example. Um, let's say Netflix, uh, I had a hit show recently, Squid Game, right? Super was a top performing show in the library, and kind of went viral, and everybody streamed it. Awesome. Let's say Netflix distributed a token to the first 10,000 people that binged Squid Game from directly within the Netflix app, right? You reach the end of episode 10 or however many episodes there were, and you get a screen that says, you're one of the first 10,000 to stream this show. Add the Squid Game token to your wallet. We can talk about wallets and what the actual user experience is for blockchain in a second, but add the Squid Game token to your wallet, and it entitles you to access to a Squid Game mobile game, right? So let's say Netflix had partnered with a company to build a Squid Game mobile game. This token enables Netflix to draw that connection, to build that bridge in between the Netflix experience and that mobile game very easily. Netflix distributes the token, the end user adds the token to their wallet, the game is able to verify that when the end user comes to the game, to the mobile application, that they own the Netflix token. Now, I said that Netflix distributed 10,000 of them, right? There were tens of millions of people that streamed Squid Game. If streamer 10,001 loves Squid Game and wants that token in order to have access to the mobile game, well, on the blockchain, that's a very easy transfer from one wallet to another wallet, right? And that effectively creates a market for Squid Game tokens. And that market can be monetized by end users as well as Netflix, right? And the way specifically that it can be monetized by Netflix is when Netflix distributes the token, they can build into the token via smart contract. Another concept kind of associated with blockchain that's fuzzy, but you can build into the token the ability for any future transactions that happen with the token for Netflix to participate in those future transactions as the creator of the token, right? So that's kind of one way, one example of how these tokens can be monetized. Now, you touched on earlier the fact that, hey, these tokens inherently add value to the end user. If Netflix is the place to get the Squid Game token, or if Strava is the place to get the, to reach the achievement that opens you up to Nike's beta platform, that inherently makes Netflix more valuable or Strava more valuable, right? That, going back to kind of the subscription growth engine, that reduces churn, that reduces acquisition costs, right? That increases conversion. Yeah, all of those things. So, it is monetizable from a value driver for your business, but it is also just fundamentally monetizable as an asset that you can participate in, when transactions happen with that asset. So I'll pause there, and then I
Yeah.
have further thought on the monetization of tokens as well.
Well, I mean, before we go there, I think one thing that I've consistently talked about on this podcast with so many guests that are, running their organizations, trying to grow and reduce churn, right? That's what every subscription business is
Right.
trying to do. And the way you do that in, now, which is very different from what it was 10, 15 years ago, is you drive engagement. You continuously
Yep.
demonstrate value because there are, and there should be, very easy ways to cancel subscriptions these days, and
Yeah.
that is the right thing to do. And yes, there are plenty of organizations that don't do that, and shame on them. They will, they're really making their own bed. But the point there is, engagement is kind of the name of the game now.
Yep.
Customer acquisition costs are so high, marketing is so expensive that once you have that consumer, you need to keep them. You need to squash
Yep.
churn in as many ways as possible. So
That's
continuously
right.
demonstrating value. And if one of the ways to demonstrate value is going outside of my walls and showing value in other areas, not only does that build enhance the value for each individual customer, it also helps to build my own community. So my
That's right.
community becomes more like members, more like people who really care about
Yes.
my brand and are happy to be part of this community because they know, hey, there's all of these other things, these other tie-ins that my membership with Merchant X will get me over there. So that will absolutely help keep the customers that you've got, but that word gets around too. So now all of a
Yeah,
sudden, the lowest cost marketing there is word of mouth. That goes up. So this is kind of
yeah,
like best of both worlds. You're keeping and making happy the customers you've got, and by doing that, you're now making all of these people want to be a part of something.
100%. And the concept of membership is something that every subscription company that I've worked at has kind of pushed towards, and
Mm-hmm.
I've worked to kind of push the thinking towards membership versus subscription, right? You
Mm-hmm.
subscribe to utility, you are a member of a community. Communities
Yeah.
are sticky, right?
Yeah.
Communities
Yeah.
are sticky.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when
Mm-hmm.
when you when you create a membership versus a subscription, and you associate a particular aspect of a person's life with that membership, that's the way to reduce churn, right? Um,
Right.
so yeah, the idea of membership resonates very, very strongly with me. And as you said, I think, you know, tokenizing your experience, and enabling your community to kind of symbolize their membership through tokens, and take that membership with them across their experiences, just deepens your connection with the community. I mean, if you look at, we kind of said we wouldn't talk about NFTs, but if you look at some of the NFTs that are out there that are selling for 250K a pop, they there's not necessarily an entitlement behind them. And I've had this debate with a lot of people recently. There's not necessarily like value behind those NFTs, right? Now, if you were to talk to a
Mm-hmm.
holder of one of those NFTs, they would say, well, the community itself is going to create the value at some point in the future, right? There's
Mm.
these are symbols
That's like
of
saying
my
a
membership.
subscription business is giving people grants for benefits, but have not yet defined what they are. Like, who the hell's signing up for that?
That's hey, there's a lot of
I
people
know there
buying
are. There are people signing up for that.
JPEGs of apes
It's
right
just
now for
nuts to
that.
me.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, right.
totally. But but I think that there's a foundation here. There's a foundation on which to be built, which
Hmm.
is the concept of owning a token, the concept of owning something that symbolizes my membership in a community and is verifiable on the blockchain,
Yeah,
right?
right.
NFTs are laying
Yep.
the foundation for that. Now, our
Yeah.
whole kind of premise is, well, there's a whole bunch of existing communities and a tremendous amount of value in existence already. You don't need to create a new
Yeah.
NFT in a new community, and great. If you're doing that, awesome. But how can existing communities use blockchain to power their experiences, to power their membership, to symbolize the different aspects of their community and membership, via
Mhm.
blockchain? That's where we see a tremendous amount of value.
Well, let's rewind. You said you have other ideas on how to monetize.
Yeah.
Be curious what those
So
are.
yeah, one other topic kind of related to subscription and monetization is where we started, um, is the the tokenization of access, the tokenization of, let's call it, subscription, right? Um, and we touched on that. We touched on that before. That's kind of where we started. Um, but if you were to provide access, let's just use Netflix, right? If Netflix were to sell tokens that enabled you to get access to Netflix versus being billed on a recurring basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they enabled Google and Apple, and they sold tokens from directly within their site as well to sell those tokens on the
Mm-hmm.
blockchain. Then they would just
Yep.
have one key that they would need to entitle. Great, Apple, take your 30%
Mm-hmm.
every time you sell a token, fine. But now all I need to verify is whether or not a user has this token in their wallet. Yes or no, binary
Right.
verification. I don't need to sync with
Yeah.
Apple receipts every night, right? I don't need to figure out like
Yeah.
what
Mm-hmm.
Stripe's webhooks and what they're sending me. All I need to know is, boom, this token's in a wallet or it's not, and you get associated access, right? Now,
Yeah.
it doesn't solve a lot of the complexity that we touched on earlier with respect to, your CMS and all the other applications that you have, right? Within
Mm-hmm.
your wall, there's still a lot of complexity there once you have the binary yes or no, but it makes things a little simpler. And interestingly enough, what it does as well is, go back to the concept of a market for tokens. I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things that's interesting if you start to go down this line of thinking is, when you subscribe to Netflix for a month, you don't actually own a month of Netflix. That's not something that you own, right? You can't do whatever you want with that month of Netflix. It's just kind of, it's just you
Yeah.
you have access to it, and whether or not you use it, you just are burning down a month of Netflix, right?
Right.
Now let's
Right.
say Netflix sells tokens that entitle you to a month of Netflix, maybe similar to like a gift card or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've used 15 days of it, and you're done with it, right? Now there is a market for tokens, and you own
Mm-hmm.
that access. That access lives in
Yeah.
your wallet, and you can
Right.
sell it. You can resell it, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
huge, like so many questions, right? And that's a fundamental
Yeah.
change to so many
Yeah.
questions, fundamental change to the business model. But I think a really core concept for us and the way that we think about it, and really the advantage of it is, when I buy something, in this world that I just described, I own it, and I own. Yeah, ownership implies the ability to sell in the future, right? And I own the ability to sell. Now, again, just like the tokens that I described earlier, Netflix could say, hey, on any resale of this token, I take a piece of that transaction. They
Mm-hmm.
could tax that transaction in the future, theoretically, right? They can
Mm-hmm.
participate, and they can
Mm-hmm.
set the tax rate as high as they want via um, a smart contract, right? So I think this is interesting for a ton of reasons, not the least of which is something that we touched on earlier, which is pricing. Pricing is extremely difficult for subscription companies. You're kind of just coming up with it in your head based on what else is out there.
Yeah.
And I think creating a market for access to a service, right, inherently markets price things pretty well. Well, maybe not the current market, maybe not the current market, maybe not the current market that we're in,
Right.
but you get the point. Like there is price discovery that happens within a market that theoretically
Mm-hmm.
you kind of arrive at what the appropriate price should be for, say, a month of Netflix. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so again, I mean, there's just like so many whatabouts that are
Yeah.
spawned as a result of that line of thinking. But when I flash forward to 5-6 years in the future, that's kind of the concept that I have for how things could work. That's the way that I'm conceptualizing the world.
Yeah. And the And again, my head's kind of exploding here with so many thoughts and comments on what you
Yeah,
just said, but I don't want to
sure,
spend another
sure.
hour doing it. But, I think one takeaway we can have here is that these ideas for these contracts and maybe sellable entitlements is that this doesn't have to apply across the board. This isn't necessarily a replacement for the traditional means of subscriptions. This can be and,
Not at
right? Not
all.
an or, it can be an
That's
and
totally right.
for
Yeah,
different, you know, yeah, for partnerships. Now, the
yeah,
market may dictate that, hey, they love that model and, we can all evolve that way. But I think it's a fascinating thing to explore. One of the
yep,
things that I think subscription struggles with the most is, that concept of ownership that you've been talking about, right? You go from the ownership economy to the not rent economy, but just lease, whatever the hell you
yep,
want to call it. But it's just a
right,
different mindset about how I interact with a product or service. Now, older generations, the I own it generation and I maintain it and it's mine. I want that versus the younger Gen Z millennial generations that are more about I don't want to own a car. I'd rather rent it when I
right,
need it. Like that's not a
right,
status symbol to me the way it was for others. So, different
right,
industries are going to interpret this different ways and they should, but
right.
I to bring that back, I think we can this doesn't have to replace any existing models. It can just be something tangential.
Not not at all. And on that point, it's you a big area of focus for us right now is you know how how can you as a company, how can we help you unlock the value that you have via blockchain? And that's going to look different. I spat out so many examples over the course of the conversation. That's going to look different for different companies, right? And it's going to depend on how you want to explore and how you want to dip your toe into the water and what you want to do. And our goal is to help you understand, really help you understand what the benefits can be for your community. And once you're there, to help you deploy that, to make it absolutely as easy as possible. Again,
Yeah.
our solution, you don't need to own cryptocurrency. You do not need to own cryptocurrency in order to unlock the value of blockchain for your community, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you don't need to know how to program smart contracts on a blockchain. We are handling all of that. We're abstracting all of that away for you, and we're just saying focus on the experience, focus on the user experience that you want to deliver for your community, and we can help you make that possible.
Well, well, Dan, in almost an hour here, we've covered a whole heck of a lot of ground, and yet at the same time,
Yeah,
it feels like we barely scratched the surface. So, if any of the
definitely.
listeners today it piqued their interest and they want to chat with you or learn more about Bundled, how can they best get a hold of you?
Yeah. Our website is getbundled.co. My email is dan@getbundled.co. You can feel free to reach out to me there. Yeah, I'm committed to responding to anyone that has any future questions. I'd be happy to. Again, a big focus for us right now is kind of the evangelism of how this could work, and
Sure.
so if it
Hmm.
takes an hour conversation with one of your listeners to help them wrap their head around how this can be impactful for their business, I'm more than happy to do it.
Well, it's going to be super interesting just to see where this, goes and evolves over the next, year or two. So many ways it can be utilized, and therefore so many directions it can go. Will be
Definitely.
interesting down the road, maybe to revisit this topic on a future podcast and kind of see the state of the union, where things are at, and kind of what the next evolution is. So we'll definitely be staying tuned and interested, and for sure. And thanks so
Awesome.
much for coming on today and sharing kind of
Yeah.
your view of how this can be used.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation and happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Take care.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Bye.